Hey Gadget Groupies, what a long, strange, twisted tale this has become. The will they, won't they roller coaster ride for LG. At the beginning of the year, potentially canceling the G7, happily just delaying the release of this phone, and now I've spent a couple weeks with it. So let's take a closer look at this device, see was this the right play for LG. Obligatory disclaimer right at the top of this video that my review unit is a pre-release model. This is pre-release hardware and software, so the experiences that I'm sharing today, some of that might change when we actually get to consumer-grade retail hardware. Like many manufacturers in 2018, LG is playing a bit of a refining game with this generation of phone. From the G6 to the V30 to now, it's really about addressing smaller issues, bandwagoning on a couple of popular trends, and trying to better meet the competition. I still believe that LG should give up on this separate branding between a G device and a V device and move to more of a big little strategy that we see from Apple and Samsung. They've already been bringing more of these features together. We should get a V40 and a V40 Plus or a G8 and a G8 Plus, not have separate branding for phones that are very similar in operation. Ah yes, the G7, another glass-on-glass sandwich with a little line of aluminum trim separating the two panels. We're not going to see a lot of surprises here for a 2018 flagship. It's a nice look for a phone, it's aesthetically pleasing to the eye, and it's not made out of razor blades or rusty rebar, so a lot of reviewers will comment on it. It feels real nice in the hand, it's got a good feel, it's got a good fit and finish, but we're not really going to be breaking any new ground here. We get a skinnier aspect ratio display, a marketing bullet point to brag up an even better screen-to-body ratio, but that's a little bit of a cheat because we do have to cut out that notch at the top of the phone. I still don't like the notch. I will admit, Android does a better job of working around it than iOS does, but I still think it's kind of a distracting eyesore. More positively, I really do like this display. This experiment going quad sub-pixel I think has been a positive impact, and we shouldn't discount LCDs just because the current fad is pointing us towards OLED devices. I've seen a number of reviewers listing LCDs as a con or shrugging them off as being somehow inferior to AMOLEDs. You know who you are. But quad pixel here is a viable strategy. In addition to an RGB stripe where every pixel gets a proper red, green, and blue subpixel, every pixel here also gets a white subpixel, which helps with image clarity and the brightness of the overall display. And this is in opposition to pentile OLED displays where there's a diagonal spread between red, green, and blue subpixels, and not every pixel gets the proper RGB. Every pixel on the G7 gets R, G, B, and W. So there's an obvious compromise here. The blacks don't get as inky, deep, and rich as they will be on an OLED device, but the screen is great when you're out in bright conditions. And LCDs tend to resist burn-in if that's something that you're concerned about, the life of your display. OLED is not some kind of automatic win. We have to be fair about the pros and cons for both technologies. The G7 gives us a higher resolution than some of the premium 1080p players, and this is an HDR-compliant display. Plus, it has a user-controllable super bright mode. This is all good stuff, I really like it. There is one accessories bummer for using an LCD over an OLED. That means the G7 is not going to be a Daydream compatible phone. If you're really wanting to use your phone to power your VR setup, then no go for you on a Daydream headset. I'm talking to like 5 people in my audience right now who are really hinging their next phone purchasing decision on whether or not their phone will support Google's Daydream. A few reviewers have already detailed the fingerprint sensor. It is a little bit slower than what I would prefer. Color me spoiled from using Huawei phones with their crazy fast and crazy sensitive fingerprint sensors, but you get a feel for it enough that you'll know when the phone registers the proper unlock while you're pulling it out of your pocket before you're folding the phone up to your face. I still prefer the rear-mounted fingerprint sensor, even a slower one over face unlock situation. In other button news, there is a side button for the Google Assistant. You can press it, fire it up, or long press it so that you can talk to it in some kind of walkie-talkie fashion, and I disabled it after a couple days. This is just not my jam. If I'm going to interact with the phone with my voice, I'm just going to talk to it. I'll use whatever hot word trigger the phone has associated with that service. I don't really want or need dedicated hardware just for that action. And if the phone's in my pocket, then I'll just use my headset. Long pressing on most headphone headsets or Bluetooth headsets will deliver you some kind of voice action that you can interact with. I don't really want extra hardware. I don't even really want a user assignable or remappable button. I'd kind of just like to get rid of extra stuff on the sides of our phones. But like notches, non-user replaceable batteries, glass-on-glass designs, these trends seem to move forward regardless of how we consumers may or may not be able to vote with our wallets. Though I am happy that for all of the buzzwordiness, all of these AI and machine learning trends, at least LG isn't trying to reinvent the wheel. Pushing on this button takes you to the Google Assistant. They aren't trying to add their own AI capabilities on top of Android with some half-baked proprietary solution. And for navigating, operating the phone, I think it's worth mentioning again, this current generation of LG products, the V30 and the G7, how nice the haptic feedback is on this device. These sensitive but substantial little pops as you type on the keyboard, or you use the zoom rocker in the camera, or when you go to focus on the camera and you can feel, it feels like a lens is shifting into place, even though we know it's not. It's really the best feel I've had on a phone outside of the peak and pop that you get from an iPhone. So my personal biases against glass and notches notwithstanding, performance has been all around excellent on this pre-release hardware. It's a Qualcomm 845, that's a great chipset, and 4 GB of RAM still hasn't represented any significant compromise to me in performance. I am regularly writing, recording, shooting, editing, and rendering 4K video from my pocketable supercomputers, and this hardware hasn't held me back from doing all the things that I like to do from my phone. Would I like a little more RAM? Sure, but I'm not entirely sure what Android would be using it for, outside of not being super discouraged that I can't engage in crazy multitasking experiments like having 5 graphics-intense games playing in the background of my phone. I guess if I were toggling back and forth between a number of different services, that might be an impact, but I really haven't been held back from doing that with Microsoft Word, CyberLink PowerDirector video editing, and the built-in HD audio recorder on the phone. I can get my multimedia work done without apps suddenly vanishing because of aggressive RAM management. Smooth, fluid performance. We should expect nothing less from this hardware, and I'm happy to report that it's lived up to my expectations. And I would say, since maybe the Qualcomm 820 generation of chipsets, Qualcomm's flagship tier hardware, anything at that tier is really gross overkill for just covering the basics. You want to knock out a few emails and check your Facebooks and scroll through your Instagram, you don't really need that caliber of CPU. So we really shouldn't be surprised that this phone is chewing up graphics-intense games at the highest settings. Rendering speeds on my 4K videos are lickety-quick. Now, the funny thing is, I often spend as much time with pre-release LGs as I do the finished consumer retail versions. And one of the areas where I've often run into problems with pre-release hardware from LG is on radio management, especially the V20 and V30. Those felt like really incomplete phones, really incomplete experiences because of some of the quirks I would have with LTE connections. I'm happy to report that signal connectivity on the G7 has been fantastic. I'm getting the full bandwidth of my cable connection, even on my mesh Wi-Fi. That's really nice because every now and then my Eero can get a little wonky with some hardware out there. And I'm getting great coverage around town on Project Fi. My review sim popped into this device. I'm pretty sure it just defaults to T-Mobile's network, and I've had no issues connecting there. Seems to be just as competitive as any other retail flagship that I've currently reviewed. And we'll talk about audio proper in just a bit, but I am happy to report that the earpiece speaker on the G7 has been fantastic, especially with Google Voice moving to Wi-Fi calling. A nice, noticeable improvement over the G6, really high quality, really loud. This has been great for taking calls. Okay, moving over to software, a lot of people are apt to complain about LG Skin. It's a pretty aggressive skin for Android right now, the current flavor being more stock devices, and LG's design is not my favorite. We can address some of those design issues through the LG Smart World app. You get some basic theme options, but I'm still really frustrated that it's pretty rare to find a theme that will also change the notification shade. I pretty much don't want any part of my UI being white background, tiny little black text. I can switch my settings menu to a dark background with light text. I should be able to do the same for my notifications. Regardless, after a couple days, I ended up just migrating over to Nova Launcher anyway. I'm a creature of habit. This is my preferred layout and customization options for gestures and swipes. So even if manufacturer skins were amazing, I'd probably just go with what I'm most familiar with anyway. It's more, LG's skin doesn't seem to impact performance to any significant degree when we compare it against other aggressively skinned and modified Android handsets. Where we're gonna have to keep an eye on LG is update performance. I'm happy to report that my V30 has been getting a little bit more attention from the manufacturer, at least more regular attention than what I ever got on the V20. I'm a little not thrilled that a current generation flagship phone from a major manufacturer is arriving with a slightly out-of-date operating system. This is Android 8 instead of Android 8.1, but I am hoping that we'll see that regular attention to detail, bug fixes, patches, security updates. That's really going to be a huge positive step for LG if they can keep on that track. Moving back to some hardware, if we're going to make the G series phone a baby V series phone, we should expect a top-tier multimedia experience. Starting with the cameras, we get a dual camera housing, and LG is still the only manufacturer offering up an ultra-wide camera instead of those really lame zoom sensor cameras on other competing platforms. Great improvements to the optics, clarity, low-light performance over last year's phone, and outside of some annoying over-sharpening and noise reduction issues that we've been seeing on LG phones for the last couple generations, especially in those ultra-low-light situations, this has been a well-capable performer in the flagship space. It's almost getting boring to talk about, but we again received the absolute best set of manual controls for photos and videos available on any manufacturer's camera app. We've long respected the manual modes on LG phones, but thankfully, starting with the V30's Oreo update, and something that the G7 does really well too, LG is finally addressing some of those concerns we've had over auto mode performance. We're doing a better job here of addressing those consumer expectations. You're going to see the HDR auto awesome output from a Pixel, and now LG's auto mode is getting us to those juicier, more colorful, vibrant shots. Those shots that already seem primed for sharing on Instagram. And thanks to some of the worst May gray weather I've ever experienced living in Southern California, my camera review wasn't quite ready to be published before finishing up this full phone review. So when it is ready, you'll see a card pop out somewhere around now. Still going to be producing that super deep dive camera review you know to expect from my smartphone coverage. That's going to be a Patreon exclusive. It's an exclusive video for my patrons, which you can check out on patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. Spoiler alert, I'm digging the camera. Likewise, audio is a huge differentiating feature for LG handsets. Quad DAC returns with a vengeance, delivering unto us the objective best headphone performance on any modern phone. I cannot stress this enough. LG's Quad DAC and high impedance amp are the best. I don't know. Maybe you don't like your ears. I happen to like my ears, and I think they deserve the best. As I said before, You like your ears just fine, I'm sure. As I've said before, this is a refining year for LG, and where the V30 disappointed was on speaker performance, so this is something they're addressing on the G7. New for this year is a special resonance chamber in the body of the phone. It's a special speaker housing, which you can really feel when this speaker is cranking. This is not a gimmick. I'd be hard-pressed to find a bigger improvement. I think this might be the single biggest improvement to audio technology from one generation of phone to the next that I've ever heard. Just like with my camera reviews, right about now, you should be seeing a little pop-up, a YouTube card up on the display, and that's going to take you to a 19-minute video I've produced talking about the G7, really going over the charts and graphs, explaining what the Quad DAC is doing, not only to high-quality music files, but also your compressed audio files, your MP3s, what you should really expect to hear when you pick this thing up. Again, those deep dives, the camera and audio reviews, going to be exclusives for my Patreon subscribers, so I hope you'll check it out, patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. Got a really fun community building over there, some fun discussion going on, and we can really dive deep into some of the nuts and bolts of the phones that live in our pockets. Lastly, all of this really cool and exciting technology won't mean much if you can't power it. The G7 turns out to be a ballpark performer, an average performer, and we probably shouldn't be too surprised. Whatever manufacturing benefits we might have from the improved chipset are going to get eaten up by a larger LCD screen and an average battery capacity. This is the smaller flagship phone from LG, and these types of smaller smartphones aren't designed to be marathon performers. So there's really no point chastising LG when we're actually doing better here than we would be with, say, a Pixel 2. Likewise, charging performance is about what we should expect from a modern Qualcomm chipset. It's not bad performance, far from it. Recharging this fast is actually pretty impressive, but again, you have to color me spoiled from spending so much time with OnePlus and Huawei supercharger crazy fast recharge systems. I had no problems getting this phone to last till dinner time, a little beyond, still having a little bit of extra battery at the end of the night. So if you're in one of those situations where you really do need to top off this phone, 20 minutes, a half hour, if you can last that long on a charger, then you're gonna get a substantial boost to your overall runtime. So, I've rambled on enough. Where does that leave us with the LG G7? Gasp! Shock! Gnashing of teeth. Gosh, did you know that when you pay full retail for a G7 on T-Mobile, it will be $30 more than a Galaxy S9? What? Thumbs down. Fail, LG. Better luck next time. Not worth it for the monies. I can only relate to the world through an Apple-Samsung dichotomy where those companies are predestined to be the only winners we can recommend. I'm of course being a lot facetious. Depending on what you personally value, there are some easy answers to recommend the price premium on this phone over the smaller Galaxy. LG actually rated the drop and shock resistance of this phone, matching it to the V series. We get a slightly higher resolution main camera, and we get a whole second camera that the Galaxy doesn't have, with a wide-angle shooter, which is really flexible and really handy in a number of photo and video situations. We get the absolute best headphone performance on any smartphone, performance so good that it's rivaling dedicated music players. If a reviewer is out there complaining about pricing, then I just think they're not looking hard enough. And ultimately, I'm just really happy to see the G series get back on track. I haven't felt this good about a G series phone since the G4. If some of these features sound like they're going to appeal to you, I don't think it's too much of a stretch. I think it's a phone worthy of your consideration. It might be time to give LG another shot. As always, thanks so much for watching. There are some links down below this video where you can support production on this channel, including checking out my Patreon page. Like I said before, that's where all of my camera and audio reviews are going to live moving forward. If you really want to dive deep, get into the nitty-gritty on how this stuff works, that's where you're going to find it, patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. And there are going to be some other fun perks too. It's where the ad-free version of the SGGQA podcast is going to be produced and distributed. And then also early access to other videos, weekly AMA, some other fun chat and community conversations. I hope you'll check it out because I already have a fun group of people, a fun community building on that, and I hope we can add more people to the discussion. Otherwise, you know where you can find me around the internet, at SomeGadgetGuy on the Twitters, the Instagrams, the Facebooks. I don't really use the Facebook, but I've got one, and I will catch you all on the next review.